All right, welcome back, everyone. We're picking up our work this afternoon with some language that is a committee bill that's being considered up in Ways and Means. We've been asked to do a drive-by since it touches on our jurisdiction. And I think what we're going to do is first have legislative counsel. Kirby and Tucker, are you going to testify jointly? Is one of you going to walk us through the language?
I believe Tucker is going to talk about the rewarding language, and if you want background on the tax part, that's fine.
Sounds great. So Tucker, do you want to come up and give us the run through on the pieces that are relevant to GovOps?
Absolutely. And if you do want any of the excellent tax information, I'll call Kirby over to hang out with me and bail me out on all of that. Good afternoon. You have in front of you a draft of a Ways and Means Committee bill. Should be draft 1.1, draft number 24-0670. And the components of this within the committee's jurisdiction are in section 3. Find that on page 4. And it relates to warnings for school district budgets for the upcoming school district meetings. So if you are with me, section 3 and subsection A, the first thing that this does is authorize the legislative body of the school district to cancel the district's vote on budget articles for fiscal year 2025. So notwithstanding any provision of law to the contrary, the legislative body may cancel the district's vote on an article or articles related to the fiscal year 2025 budget. And here's the limiting piece: for the sole purpose of amending the proposed budget.
Yeah, it's under Kirby Keaton's name.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Was it under?
Kirby Keaton.
So I have a question about pushing out the vote.
So Representative Hango, since you just came in,
Yeah, sorry,
we're going to hear what it is. And then, so actually, let me take a step back. So Ways and Means is considering a committee bill. The purpose of the bill, Kirby can speak to questions about that, but I'll give the kind of why are we this particular bill, how does this fit in from my layman's perspective. So I'm sure you're all aware that because of the kind of unprecedented pressures on school budgets, the budgets that were warned ended up being much larger this year. Proposals much larger this year than were even anticipated back in December. And they certainly, the increase by in percentage was much higher than anybody contemplated when Act 127, the people waiting bill, was passed. And what that did was it essentially broke the mechanism that was being used to kind of smooth out for districts that had been historically advantaged in terms of having tax capacity in the formula before Act 127. They've been given sort of a circuit breaker and an opportunity to essentially be able to spend above a cap and without having it affect their local tax rate. Well, with increased pressures on school budgets, many districts across the state had large percent increases. And so the Ways and Means Committee is considering essentially saying this isn't going to work the way we thought it was going to work in Act 127. We're going to change that mechanism. We're not here to review that mechanism that's changing. That's the first part of the bill. But the part that we've been asked to weigh in on are the mechanics of what happens if we allow districts who, are now seeing a new formula to cancel their budget vote and do a new election. So what I wanted to do before anybody asks any questions, we get down a rabbit hole, is just have Tucker walk us through what the bill does in terms of the elections and the school budgets. And then I know we'll have a lot of questions, and I just want to make sure we all get on the same page first, and then we'll dive in. So there will be time for questions, I promise. So go ahead, Tucker.
I will back up a bit to make sure that we're all in the same sentence to start. So in subsection A, regarding the school district budget votes. Notwithstanding any provision of law to the contrary, the legislative body of a school district, school board here, may cancel the district's vote on an article or articles related to the FY 2025 budget for the sole purpose of amending the proposed budget. So these are the school districts that are going to amend the budgets that have been proposed. And for that purpose, are going to cancel the vote on those articles.
Representative Pink.
I don't know what it means to cancel a vote.
I think you can take it by its express terms. They're going to cancel those articles for vote at the district meeting.
What if the ballots have already been mailed out via absentee ballot, which they already have?
The Secretary of State, and you will hear excellent testimony from Will Senning, has a plan in place for guidance that may be sent to local officials on how to alert the voters that it's going to be canceled. Part of that is in here, which is amending the warning to let the voters know that it's not going to be there. And reaching out to voters with the mailing of the ballots and subsequent information to let them know that this article is not going to be voted on at the district meeting, but instead at a later date.
I'm going to just ask everyone to hold questions so that we can all get through what is on the page. And then I swear we'll take questions. We're going to get great testimony from Will explaining. So if we can just keep it to the words on the page just until Tucker gets through it, and then we'll get into it. Go ahead. Next.
The next provision in subsection A, this is for those districts that have canceled the vote. The district that cancels the vote on its budget articles shall amend the warning for its annual district vote to state that the budget vote is canceled. So there's an express requirement that you amend the warning to say canceled. And shall move the date of the budget vote to a date on April 15th. 2024. Two requirements here. First, that you amend the warning to say canceled. And second, that you move the budget vote to a later date, which has to be on or before April 15th. April 15th is the deadline for these purposes for holding that vote. Okay. Those are the mechanics. Subsection B, there's an appropriation. $500,000 appropriated from the general fund to the Secretary of State for fiscal year 2024 for the purpose of offsetting election costs incurred as a result of this change. One thing that I'll note here, because it did come up in some of Will's testimony this morning, is that there's a piece here at the end that ties this directly to the movement of that vote pursuant to this section. And there may be districts that are able to use, for example, the Act 1 authority, their annual vote, in order to accommodate the new calculations who may need assistance as well. But I'll leave that to Will to articulate in better terms. Subsection C, this ensures that if there's any conflicting authority that exists in an educational charter or a municipal charter that requires, for example, specific warning timelines or warning procedures, that this temporary authority will supersede those charter provisions and will allow those educational corporations to use this authority.
So are there any questions just about the specific words on the page? I think what I'd like to do is take those questions if it's just about like a definition, but the mechanics, I'd like to save questions about sort of how this will work until we hear Mr. Senning's testimony. So questions about the specific words on the page. Representative Chase.
I think it's about this. If not, we can defer to Will. You said cancel the articles. Would that mean that only certain portions of it would be canceled and the rest of the vote would be held at the originally intended time?
Correct,
Okay.
including, for example, the district elections of their officers who are eligible for election.
Thank you.
Who is subsection C, who is the temporary authority in subsection A?
The temporary authority is this bill itself. So the temporary authority that is granted under subsection A.
Okay, that probably should say granted in subject section, because when I thought of temporary authority, I was thinking of some kind of temporary body.
Representative Morgan, sorry.
Is Will gonna talk to the money?
Yes,
Okay. So,
I
sorry,
believe so. I mean, I can't read Will's mind, but I assume he'll address that.
because that's a significant chunk of money.
So before Will does that, maybe Kirby could tell us when we're looking at the ed fund. I think this is context. What in the conversations that were happening upstairs in Ways and Means, what kind of amounts are they talking about potentially having schools that take a look at this formula? What do they think the impacts in terms of reduction in ed fund pressure will be if a number of schools take advantage of this roughly? Just want to get a sense of the scale because this seems like a lot, but I believe it's on the order of tens of millions of dollars in potential reduction in ed fund pressure.
Sure. So Kirby Keene, Legislative Counsel. The best person to answer that would probably be Julia Richter from JFO. Just I want to preface with that. But what I can tell you is that the other part of this bill that does provide some relief for as a transition mechanism to new pupil weighting would cost approximately, the estimates are around 30 million. It also repeals the tax caps, if you're all aware of homestead tax caps from Act 127. That would have cost far more than 30 million. I don't know the exact number. I think JFO would, because I think that number is moving a lot as we learn information about what's going on with the school district.
5%?
The 5% cap would have, yeah, because it seems like a lot of districts were taking advantage of it, and it would have caused quite a large hole that would have been filled by non-homestead taxpayers and by whatever the General Assembly would do to address that hole also. So the expectation is that without the 5% cap being such a huge relief, that there will be, it's speculative, so who knows how many school districts will take advantage. But some of them that have very high budgets will lose that 5% and will need to go back, I would imagine, and come up with a new budget, potentially far less. And if that happens across several school districts, then that means that the entire system would have to pay for less. There would be a much smaller hole in the fund. So that's why the Ways and Means is interested in this approach.
The Maple Run School District and their superintendent told us at a public meeting that had they done what many school districts have done and spent up to the point where it would have impacted them, if they just spent everything that they could under the current Act 127 formula, it would have been an additional $5.7 million. So if you assume that there are a number of districts that sort of, I should say, used the formula, I've heard some people talk about it as taking advantage of the formula, but we're talking about tens of millions of dollars. So the idea here is to make an investment that'll potentially have a huge relief on the ed fund if a number of districts go back and say, okay, we can't take advantage of what was in Act 127 because that formula no longer applies because of what's previous. So that's kind of the policy around here.
More questions about Act 127 or have a need to learn more about the mechanism of replacing the caps?
I'm sure some more questions will come up. I think what we'll do is hear Director Senning talk about how this is likely to play out, because I know he's worked a bunch with the Ways and Means Committee and you all led council to come up with this language. So we'll hear from him and then imagine folks will have more questions. So Will. Thank you
Are
for
you
being
ready
here.
for me?
We are.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if you could walk us through the Secretary of State's position on this and give the committee your thoughts on kind of how this will work in different districts that have different voting methods, I think that would be really helpful.
Can do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to take 30 seconds, maybe 20 only, just to start by thanking you all also for the resolution that you passed a week or two ago, whatever it was. That was really special for me. Really, really appreciated. The Secretary of State surprised me with my whole family in the chamber. And I worked really hard over the 10 years I've been here to have a good working relationship with the legislature. So to hear that acknowledged in such a public way was really meaningful for me. So thank you. Secondly, and my last day is Friday, so you guys are catching me a couple days before I'm out of here. Of course, somebody had to throw a local election related curveball at me in my last week in the job.
What we do.
It's our way of thanking you. And it's our desperate attempt to, just get you back in the House Gov one last time.
You're right. That's what this was all about in the end. Third, I do need to note that I am going to have to leave at about 10 of 3. So I've got about 30 minutes. Hopefully we can do this in that time. I got to pick my daughter up at the bus and there's nobody else here right now to do so. So I really can't not. And so I'll try to be quick and then leave as much of the time as I can for questions.
Great.
And what I told Ways and Means this morning was, I know that this bill needs to move quickly, right? That's one of the most important parts of it because of the fact that the March 5th meetings have already been warned. And so while I otherwise might kind of look through language like this with a fine tooth comb and nitpick it and suggest some additions, deletions, I spent a lot of time looking at what's on the page in front of you now. And I do think that it would be workable passed as is with the language that is there now. What it's going to require, and I'll get into that a little bit in the next 5 or 10 minutes, is a lot of additional kind of guidance and information from our office out to the clerks. But I think that we can fill the gaps with that guidance without the need for writing them into this session law at this point in time. The general message that I started with for Ways and Means is, of course, this is going to be messy. It's going to be frustrating and an additional burden on those clerks that have to pivot and react to a school district that might take advantage of this provision. And it's going to be confusing for voters. I think we just have to accept that as a bottom line and do everything we can to minimize those impacts, both the administrative burden on the clerks and the confusion among voters. Obviously, the legislature or those who've given it their blessing so far have made the calculation that making this change is important enough to kind of result in navigating those changes for what's already, a local election annual meeting season that's already in process right now. And I say that because to kind of set the stage, I think you all are aware, but for the March 5th annual meetings, which is the standard annual meeting time for all towns, cities, and villages, and has also traditionally been a standard annual meeting time for a lot of school districts across the state. Those warnings were already required to be posted and have been posted this past Sunday. Additionally, so the warnings were posted on Sunday, and the ballot deadline for those votes, for those districts that vote either the budget article or other articles by ballot, is next Wednesday. It's a week from today. And just anecdotally, with some exchanges with school districts and clerks who help them administer their elections, a week out from that process has started for a lot of them. They've either, sent the finalized ballot proof to the printers for printing. Some may have begun printing. Some may have gotten them back by now. But the deadline for them to have those ballots in hand and available for voters is next Wednesday. That's a deadline, right? It's not They don't have to wait until then. And so a number of them may already have these ballots ready and may have already started sending these ballots out. That deadline provision works in conjunction with another provision where it says, basically you start sending your ballots out to any voters who have requested early absentee ballots as soon as you get those ballots. So it says by 20 days before the meeting or whenever you receive the ballots, whichever happens first. And it tells them, it's some old legal language actually in the absentee balloting chapter where it says they shall send the ballots forthwith after receiving them. Forthwith, I have always interpreted to mean as soon as possible. So as soon as you can after you receive the ballots. So we're in a situation here where there may be some school districts who have a meeting warned already and potentially may have even begun sending out ballots or at the very least printing ballots.
Did Will freeze?
Yeah.
Looks like it.
Hey, Will, if you can hear us, it looks like your connection is frozen.
Turn the video off.
And if you didn't just hear Representative Morgan, if it's possible to turn your video off, that might help.
I'm back.
Wow, all right.
Now that is solution.
I have no idea what just happened there. The Zoom box just completely collapsed. I just re-entered.
So I think you had just finished, Will, saying, acknowledging that there are likely districts who have already started sending out their ballots.
And at the very least have them printed and definitely have their warnings posted. So the most important points for our office to provide guidance on, and I sort of the way I framed it for the Ways and Means Committee was I wanted to make sure I was clear on what their intent was. And I think I am. And I do that the same with you all who are more the experts in election administration. As somebody was asking initially, right? The way I read the language is that they can cancel just the budget vote and amend the currently posted warning in that regard. So I think you all know too, although there's some common misconception out there, that school district annual meetings contain more business than just the budget vote. It's not just the budget vote. They have to elect their officers, clerk, treasurer, et cetera. They have to elect their board members that have terms up for election. And they may have other public questions, just questions like you get at your town meeting ballots that pertain to the school district. So, and as you were pointing out, Chair McCarthy, before, right, there's a mixture among those districts in how they vote those various articles. They have the same three options that towns and cities do, where they can be either from the floor or by Australian ballot for their budget article, their officers, and or their other business. And so there's all kinds of mixtures of those voting methods across different portions of the business, even within a district, right? But what's important here is that this legislation authorizes them to cancel what may have been a previously warned budget vote. So with regards to the warning, and I think that is the approach you would want, and it requires, if you do that, to re-warn a budget vote later in the spring. They put a deadline of that of April 15th, but that re-warned budget vote on just the budget article would require another full 30-day warning. I think that's advisable. I think you wouldn't have wanted to pass something that said they can amend the budget that's been warned right now and still vote it on March 5th. Because then you get into, sufficient notice issues with voters, as well as sort of more complicated ballot issues, because you would have to get the new number out to them in time to vote on March 5th. So I think the approach taken here to say we're going to cancel that particular article or articles related to the budget and rewarn those on a full warning later in the spring is the right way to go. Where that leaves you, though, is that you may have the rest of the business of the annual meeting occurring on March 5th. That's going to remain warned. The warning that's up there right now at the post office and everywhere else in town, there'll be a replacement warning put up as soon as possible after the school board votes to do this, that has the budget article crossed out and makes very clear, my guidance coming from our office always is, whenever you're amending a warning in any kind of circumstances like this, to make it as clear as possible that it's been amended and how it's been amended. You know, if the school warning is up there and you've looked at it and walked past it once, if you just put up another one without a real clear indication that something's different, you don't have any reason to look at it again. And so I encourage the clerks and their election workers to make that as obvious as possible that there's been a change. And then, of course, there's going to be reach out through all of their other channels of communication with voters, their website, any email lists they have, potentially newspaper publications, local papers, and I would say definitely on Front Porch Forum for all of them that regularly post town business notice on Front Porch Forum. So it does set up a situation where if they do this, you'll still have the school district meeting in whatever form it follows for all of the business that's been warned other than the budget. And then you're going to have the budget vote later in the spring, which will also get a full warning. That, as a general matter, that's just about really good, clear, voluminous communication with the voters on what's going on. That's magnified, right? Because as people have pointed out, not all districts are going to take advantage of this. So there may be some districts that are moving along on regular course and are going to vote everything on March 5th and aren't going to have a follow-up budget vote. That makes it a little more difficult, for instance, from the state level for us to do any kind of blast consistent messaging. I think it's going to be most important for the messaging to come at a local level, what's going on in your town specifically, so that voters are clear on that. So that's the approach to warnings, is amend the current warnings, post them in every place where they're posted now, do so as soon as possible after you hear from your board. After I testified to Ways and Means, I'll tell you guys, drafting a bulletin that I will be sending to all the clerks with at least our first round of guidance on this. I made it clear to them, it's not always entirely clear, it's a pretty common question, that the warning should be adopted and signed by the school board. The school statutes allow for the
Oh, no, you froze again, Will.
We should get some questions in.
We will absolutely. I want to make sure that he has a chance to explain, because I feel like he's already answered several of the questions that we had.
Are we gonna have possession?
No, we will not have possession of this bill.
Is House Education doing a drive-by also?
This language has been closely coordinated between House Ed and House Ways and Means. I believe the bill is going to come out of Ways and Means, but
So they had a joint hearing.
I don't know exactly. So I don't want to say on the record how they coordinated. I have enough trying to coordinate what we're doing in here to know how House Ed and House Ways and Means are working together.
Question basically was this a chair to chair thing, or was the committee, were the two committees involved?
I was brought in
Legislation.
I was brought in late because Representative Conlin and Representative Kornheiser had both been had started to talk publicly about the idea. So last week, when they started to talk about the idea of changing the formula to a cents versus this percent formulation, they made it clear that that would make a number of people reconsider their budget. And the initial proposal that just kind of got floated out in one meeting I was in was, somebody threw out the idea of a mechanism that I don't think would have worked very well. And so I raised my hand and said, I think we need to have the Secretary of State and other people weigh in on this language. And now this is the first opportunity that there's been a draft to look at. But
We have Will back, but that did not answer my question about the two committees.
I can get that answer. I just don't know.
Okay, thanks. That's all I need.
Yeah. All right, Will, sorry.
No, I really apologize. I don't know what's happening with my Zoom feed. At least I'm able to jump right back on. So if it happens again, give me 15 seconds and I can jump right back in.
Sounds good. I have a couple of questions in the room, so I might we'll use the pause. So Representative Hango and then Representative.
Thank you. My first question is absentee ballots that may have already been sent out. If that school district of that region that's already sent out, or that town rather, that's already sent out their absentee ballots, what happens to those absentee ballots that are returned early?
It's a good question, and it actually lets me get into the last 5 minutes of what I was going to say and then completely open it up, which is, okay, so how do you deal with ballots? In the circumstance you just described, Rapango, the advice has to be the only real option. So if you've already sent out a ballot with the budget number and the budget vote that's now being revised, and maybe or maybe not, it has other business on that ballot too, right? But either way, when that comes back, you just have to ignore those. So if it's a ballot with a bunch of other business, you'll run it through the tabulator, print the results, but you're just not looking at those results. That vote's been canceled. It has no effect. They voted on something that now isn't up for decision, and that all the voters won't have had an opportunity to vote on. There's no better way to approach that other than that's where you would get into, do you send them, you're not creating a follow-up ballot right now with the new budget to be voted on March 5th. It's going to be voted on later in the spring with another full warning period. So you're not turning around and saying, don't vote on that, but vote on this before March 5th. What you want to do is still kind of honor the opportunity they've had to vote on anything else that was on that ballot, count those votes. And you're just ignoring, for lack of a better word, the results that come back. They'll be incomplete and of no effect. And so you just tell the clerks that's you essentially treat it like the article isn't there.
Just that article.
Just that article. And then
All the
you
other stuff counts.
proceed with everything else in the same way. That's been warned. It's had its full warning. It's been up. It hasn't been changed.
And same thing for hand counted ballots. That towns that don't have tabulators. I think there are a few towns left.
Same thing, whether it's on a tabulator or not. And then
Okay.
to just complete that thought, right? So you might have sent out some, but not all. If you still have more to send out, or if you haven't sent out any, my advice at this point, left with no better option, is that they can manually edit those ballots that they're sending out. By which I mean, take a black magic marker and strike through the budget article and say postponed. In addition to that, right, it would be my guidance to them to try to include some kind of note in the mailing when the ballot goes out, noting the budget article has been canceled by the board for the March 5th vote. It will be postponed and voted on later in the spring. You will see that reflected that it's been crossed out on your ballot. Don't bother voting the budget article. If they still go ahead and fill in that oval, the tabulator will read it when you run it through. But again, the clerk is just going to ignore that portion of the results because that article is not up for business at the meeting. I was in thinking through the bulletin I was writing with them this morning. I think my guidance will be that if they do that for their absentee ballots that go out from here on out, they should do the same thing for the in-person ballots at the polling place and try and strike through that article on all the in-person ballots so that as much as possible, all the voters are getting the same form of ballot given to them. If they're lucky enough to have not printed them yet, they're waiting for that 20-day deadline next Wednesday, then we would tell them not to print the budget article, omit it from whatever the proof is that they send to the printer if their board acts in that amount of time. I think for clerks that may have had them printed already, haven't sent any out and used tabulators, this is where you get a little bit into the details, but I think it actually would be more difficult to go and get new tabulator readable ballots printed right now, because what that's also going to do is change the programming on the machine. It'll change the setup of the ballot if that article is taken out. So then the ovals are in different positions and the memory card on the machine would have to be reprogrammed to accurately read that ballot. So they can do that. They can incur that additional programming costs and ballot design redesign, or they can go with the ballots they have now and put a big black magic marker through the budget article and say canceled.
So one last question.
Yeah, if you want to follow up, and then I've got a couple other hands.
Thank you. So if other items are on that ballot, which there are, that are being voted on, that don't need to be amended or struck out. For instance, school board directors are being elected. If new school board directors are elected who did not participate in the budget development process, and now a new school board is seated on March 5th or 4th or whatever date it is. 6th. So new school board is seated. The budget hasn't been voted on because the board has just, the previous board has decided to postpone the vote. So now you've got a new board. That's a pretty tight turnaround to have them back in voting on having a budget ready to be voted on by April 15th. So how does that affect this process?
I think what you described is true. The new board members take office upon election and then would be voting active members of the board at that point and would have to come up to speed pretty quickly to get a new budget article in place. That's the nature of what we're faced with this late change.
So if the board were able to rework their budget, if the current board were able to rework their budget really quickly before March 5th, how would that be presented to the voters if a new board is seated on March 6th? Does that make a difference? Or would they have to wait until March 6th to rework their budget?
There's no language to that effect. You're getting a little bit into, school board machinations that are a little bit outside of my area
Okay.
domain. However, but what I would say is that where the rubber meets the road is when the warning gets approved in terms of the election and in terms of the language that'll be presented to the voters. So that's 30 days. The deadline in here is April 15th. So that puts it in the middle of March by when they need to actually sign off on the warning. And that's, they could have all kinds of preliminary votes on what the budget number maybe should be, but it's the vote when they decide what they're going to post on the warning to the voters. That's the substantive one.
And that probably should be after March 6th when a new board.
This legislation is silent on that though, right, Will? It's up to the districts, that whichever duly elected school board. And the reason we're trying to move this as fast as we are is that we want school boards to be able to get out. If they're going to take advantage of this authority, they don't have to. But if they're going to look at the change in the formula that's in the first part of this bill and decide to do that, we want them to be able to make that decision as quickly as possible. I would guess, to Representative Hanger's point, most of them are going to do that with the currently seated board. If we move this before the end of the month, I think they're going to know, because they would have had that the existing school board would have had the opportunity during their budget process to make the decision about whether they were going to use all of the capacity that they had, or whether they were going to do like what my school district did and do more of a tighter, more conservative budget. And so not every district is going to take advantage of this. This is just an option that we're giving them, but just because we are changing the formula. But I'm guessing it's going to be the outgoing board that will probably do it, just given the timeline, unless we take too long to consider this bill. So I had a bunch of short. So Representative Hooper, do you have a
Well,
question?
it occurs to me that my question probably is not for him because it's not really about elections. I guess I was gonna ask him, but I could ask anybody, what's our timeline? I could ask you.
I believe that Ways and Means wants to vote this out by Friday in order to give.
But we don't have possession, correct?
No.
So
We're-
we really are just basically
We're here just hearing.
fielding opinion, right?
Well, I think the Ways and Means Committee, for instance, there's this issue around Act One authority. If they wanted us, because we do election policy and we crafted Act One, this significantly changes Act One, what we did last year.
Sure.
Right? It's in some ways for the districts who decide to rewarn their budget. It says, you originally had this flexibility that Act One gave you, but now we're just saying if you're changing it midstream, you have to have your new number voted on by April 15th. Am I right about that, Will?
That's my understanding. And I did point out to Ways and Means this morning that in the very underlying school district law, they have flexibility in when they schedule their annual meeting in the first place. A range is given from March 15th until June 30th for school districts to hold their annual meeting. That's long time existing law. And there are certain school districts, I don't have the number or the names offhand, but that probably as a traditional matter have their annual meeting scheduled even after April 15th, but sometime before June 30th. And then I added the additional layer that there is the Act 1 authority you're talking about, which could in theory still be used, I think, to reschedule a meeting until July 1.
My only other question was, I think Will already answered. We don't know exactly how many districts have already sent out their ballots. Is that correct?
Very few, if any.
Well, that was the timeline.
Oh, yeah. I think you'll find people are just getting them printed right now, and they'll be available to mail generally, I think, in about 4 or 5 days.
Printing is as effective as mailing, right? It's creative, yeah.
Yeah.
It still exists.
Will, can you just clarify that before we go to Representative Higley's question, which is, so many districts have sent their ballots to the printer, they're kind of receiving them now, but haven't mailed them to voters yet, the ones that are going to mail them to voters, or, you know, just have them available physically and start doing absentee ballots. So you had talked about those folks who get ballots, if their school board decides to take advantage of this authority, if we pass this relatively quickly through both bodies and the governor signs it, they might be able to actually mark that the budget article has been canceled on those ballots before people have a chance to vote.
Yes.
It's gonna be close.
And I just want to be clear that it's entirely anecdotal in what I've heard via a few emails as to what position various districts are in. I would suggest the School Boards Association may be able to do a survey. You know, my email list is town and city clerks, but the School Boards Association may have a superintendent contact list and or board chair contact list that could quickly be used to try to gather that information.
Representative Higley.
So I think this is for you, Will. I know because this is such a special provision, should there be something included in there that says that, you know, towns will still have to be required to warn the article 30 days before that date of on or of April 15th, 2024? I mean, you've stated that they've got to do it, but should it be in this as well? Or are folks going to for sure know that it's not a special time without it being in this?
It's a good question. That was one of the examples I was thinking of when I led off by saying I could nitpick it and suggest additional language to make it perfect. But Rep. Higley, by omission, since it says nothing else, it's a 30-day warning period for any vote, and that will be at least our office's clear guidance.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Morgan, did you still have a question?
No, I was just re-clarifying, but I think Wilson, just real quick, is it is individually up to board by board by board, school board by school board by school board. It's their discretion, and it's not mandatory, it's not mandated, it's up to them individually.
Yeah, so the construction here, my understanding is, and Will, correct me if I'm wrong, each so this is saying, here's some extra authority. So the top part of this bill makes the change in the formula and does all the Act 127 stuff that Kirby can answer questions on once Will's gone if folks need the context. But the piece we're looking at here in section 3 says, if you change your budget and want to rewarn it, school board, so it's giving a power to the school board.
Yeah.
If you do that, then we'll help defray the cost of the additional printing, voting, et cetera. And that, you know, you have to have that vote no later than April 15th. If you decide to do that. And so just given all the percentages and numbers, I think Representative Kornheiser said at caucus yesterday that, you know, as many as, you know, a third of school districts may be impacted in some way. But then there are districts that they actually were a little more conservative and didn't spend all the way up, and they may just decide, our budget's as tight as we can make it. We're not going to do anything. There are others who were very public about saying, we had an opportunity to do a capital improvement project that we've been waiting on for years without it having any tax impact. So we're just going to go ahead and grab everything that the existing current 27 formula would give us. And they essentially spent an extra $3 to $5-6 million that they might not have spent otherwise. And so the whole idea here is to give the school board the ability, if we're going to change the formula, to rewarn their budget and vote on a budget that reflects the current tax policy, because everything about the December 1st letter and the Act 127 formula, if we pass the first couple sections of this bill, be really unfair and create chaos, I think, to not give school districts the opportunity to go back and rethink some of the decisions that we know have been made in at least some of the districts. Will, I know you need to go. So anybody, Representative Hango, is your question for Will?
I'm not sure if it's for Will or Kirby. It probably could be either one, so.
Is it about the elections mechanics?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. That's for Will.
Okay, so this bill does not say anything about how the election will occur, how the balloting will occur. So my assumption is whoever wrote the bill is thinking that everyone will go and vote in person again on another day, the date to be set sometime before April 15th. Is that correct? Or again, reach out to your town clerk to get an absentee ballot. So that's gonna really require a ton of public attention to this, to bring people's attention to it.
Really good question. You've had a couple today that have reminded me things I wanted to say. Where I thought you were going first is, of course, in terms of method of voting, whether it's voted at a floor meeting or by Australian ballot, would stay the same. That's been adopted by the district as the method of voting their budget, right, for all time. And so if they scheduled that rescheduled vote would follow that same method. But more importantly, and it's one of the only things I might have wanted to have specifically called out in the bill in an ideal world, but will be part of my guidance, is that if a person had an absentee ballot request for the school district ballot for this currently scheduled meeting, they will be automatically sent one for the rescheduled meeting and will not need to make another request for that new vote. I think that's just in fairness to the voters. We should say that a request for this meeting that was then subsequently canceled, at least one article of this meeting and postponed, that you shouldn't have to request another ballot. All the steps are going to be to try and make sure everybody knows this is happening. And one of the easiest ways to do that would be to send a ballot to anyone who had a request for this vote.
Yeah.
And with that, I do really have to run, Chair McCarthy. It takes me about 10 minutes to go down there and get her at the end of the road and come back. I can email you if you're still in discussion and want me back. I can pop back in.
I will, so I think Ways and Means is looking for a recommendation from us, but we have, they're trying to get a bill out by Friday. So I think we're gonna have a little committee discussion now. If there are other questions, we will get back to you. I'll shoot you an email, and if we could get you back in for a few minutes tomorrow, if we need to, then I'll keep you on speed dial.
I was gonna say, I actually am pretty wide open tomorrow.
Great.
Well,
very helpful. Thank you very much, Will. Go get your daughter.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Representative Hango, go ahead.
Thank you.
It's a lot.
A third of the 120 something school districts are possibly affected by this. That's quite a few voters. And I'm wondering how many of them are going to show up at the polls on another date to vote on this. And I know there's no answer to that, but I just wanted to bring that up, that turnout could be, I don't know. I mean, we have enough trouble with turnout as it is. So I don't really know where to go with this.
Yeah, this is one of those things that's a real conundrum. Go ahead, Representative.
No, I was just gonna say that piece, and I know I'm like walking in like 90% of the way through the conversation. But with that, right, it's the district's making the choice
Mhm.
to move, so they're making that calculation. themselves. We're just providing them with the tools to have support to do so if they choose.
So that's a,
Yeah, go ahead, Representative.
is this speaking freely?
Yeah, it's community discussion. We don't.
Well, that brings up an interesting reality, right? That we're basically signaling to districts that they have the option to produce a budget figure that is smaller than the one that they've already prepared. What gives them any inclination to do so? Why would they?
So Kirby can answer that question, I think. Because we didn't talk about what the first part of this bill does.
Yeah, exactly.
In any
The other-
detail. But I'll tell you what, they're gonna have a strong incentive. to
Yeah, he's gonna
explain
close the
it.
And just for your own, for premise, I frankly don't think that this bill even comes close to directly solve, or even trying to solve a problem directly. This is basically an
It's the
extension.
first step in a long process.
Yeah, a long
Yeah.
process that's never worked. Budgets don't ever go down, they just don't. And this bill isn't about to do, like, it's, anyway, maybe he's got.
Yeah, let's do this part, then we'll get back to that.
Kirby Key, Legislative Council. So the question is what incentive might a school district have to rewarn a budget? So Section 7 of Act 127 is repealed by the bill, which means no more 5% tax rate cap for homestead properties. And also there's this tax rate review that's also being repealed that's related to that. And instead it's being replaced with a % decrease for tax rates, but only available for districts that had less tax capacity is one way to put it without trying to get into a whole lot of math. There's the reason why this is happening at all, of course, is because Act 127 changed how pupil weighting is done. And there were some districts that will have less tax capacity because their pupils won't be counted as highly as they used to. And then there'll be other districts that basically have more pupils, even though they don't necessarily gain students or anything, based on the weighting.
Sure.
And more pupils means more funding, right? Or more tax capacity.
Right.
So instead of having a tax cap for everyone before, just the districts that have less capacity now. And that's measured in the bill as a relative decrease compared with the state share of tax capacity. The new pupil weights overall, I don't know if this is going to just confuse things or not, but overall tax capacity for the whole state went up because of new pupil weighting. So that's why the bill looks at your relative increase or decrease compared with all the other districts.
Right.
So compared with everyone else, do you have a lot less tax capacity or a negative tax capacity relative to the other districts?
Sure.
So I believe, I'm not JFO, I don't have the numbers, but I do think it might be less than 50% of the school districts have that decrease in tax capacity. But under this, those are the only ones that will get a benefit. Otherwise, there's not. The 5% cap disappears and nothing replaces it.
Right.
For those that have increased capacity. So for a school district, for instance, that had increased capacity, but they still took advantage of the 5% cap rate because of a capital project or just because they felt like other districts were doing it and they were going to be left behind. I mean, lots of different reasons, right? They could have done that. Maybe their budget for this year their proposed budget was a lot higher than it would have been. Now that they're not capped at 5% and they learn that, that's your incentive to maybe go back and spend a lot less. Because it would mean that the homestead taxpayers in your district are going to pay a lot less if you go do that. So there'll be the homestead taxpayers tend to be more like the voters. And those are the ones I believe that the school districts are more concerned with how they feel about it.
So generally, this is basically the theory that we create the option for, I don't know, maybe not even 50% of districts to go back to the drawing board, assuming all of them did that, right? How much do you suppose? And I know you just said you're not JFO, you don't have the numbers, but percentages, maybe estimates, what would we save? Like it seems to me the problem that we're trying to solve here is the reality that in almost all districts, property taxes are simply too high. And they will continue to go up, and they will continue to go up next year and the year after, despite having done this bill. It's a non-solution to a problem that we are pretending to address. And that is problematic for me.
So Representative Kornheiser has basically described this, and she said this yesterday pretty clearly, that there are a whole bunch of pressures. You're totally right. School budgets are going up. The one thing that we did, though, that exacerbated some problems that there is a sort of universal recognition that we did not anticipate when we passed Act 127 was this idea that the mechanism that we used to give a glide path for those districts that were going to lose tax capacity in order to solve some of the equity issues, that because so many of the budgets went up so much more than we would have anticipated all at once, like this year had kind of an unprecedented 1 year because of the perfect storm of 16% healthcare increase, the ESSER funding going away, but districts still needing to keep a lot of the things that they were funding going. There are a whole bunch of factors that Representative Conlon, Representative Kornheiser's committees have been digging into. That's kind of not our bailiwick. But I think what you're getting at really appropriately is that this isn't going to solve all the problem. But what they've talked about is something on the order of districts who especially had like long-term capital needs that they just hadn't been able to fund. They had an opportunity because of Act 127 to spend $1 million more than they might have otherwise without it having a local property tax impact. And then that burden was pushed onto everybody else, right? So we can at least, with this mechanism, potentially fix that part of it. But you're totally right. This doesn't solve the whole problem, but it might solve, like, if we think the problem is like 200 million, it might solve like 50 million of it, which isn't nothing.
Act 127, and I fully supported this enhancement, a really complex funding formula, but it's becoming increasingly evident that the funding formula doesn't seem to work, and we don't seem to have political will in this building to address that reality, because we've done way too many years, session after session of work on policy that, in theory, right, creates what all 50 states could hopefully consider the most theoretically equitable funding formula in public education. But it doesn't do that.
So I think that's valid, and that argument's going to be happening for years. But right now, what we have before us is a mechanism to address a chunk, right?
But you're right.
The question for us, and we've got to go up to the floor, but the question for us is this language around balloting and budget, did we get that right? The mechanics of that right? That's what Ways and Means is asking for our input on. I'm going to ask Will to come back again tomorrow afternoon. So look at this language overnight, think about questions. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow afternoon. So let's
Thank you
adjourn.
for
We'll go
bringing
upstairs.
this